So we have understood some very important modules as we have started with the math module, time, date time, random module, calendar, system, OS, right? It's simple. Whatever the Python file you create, depending whether you use the keyword import or whether you just run as a script, right? Now the next concept is how do we relate the same concept of modules or whatever the functions which we have learned till now. What is these files basically? Generally, if you think about any file, let's consider very simple example. When you go for storing our certificates or anything, when you just store in your file, I mean in a location, that is generally called a certificate file, right? When you go for an interview, you just carry a file with all the papers, right? Generally, that is where we store some information, right? Whether it is attendance related or certificate related or it contains some data. That's where you generally understand from letters to words, words to group of sentences, sentences to paragraphs, and paragraphs to documents and everything, right? Because data is very, very important in our daily life. And that is how do we communicate with our machine? That's where input and output system plays a very key role. And because we just generally, if you are seeing the screen, that's an output thing. And when you're hearing my voice is your input, and you are able to see the result on the screen, whatever we are executing. Because generally, the main advantages of storing the data in the files is whenever you store the data in a file, that can be a text file or image or video or anything. Because generally, there are only two types of files. One is text file and the other one is binary file. Because when the data is stored in a file, it is stored permanently. That means when the computer is switched off also, we can retrieve the data because it is already saved. That can be .txt or anything. And even we can update the file, we can run the file, we can rename it. We all have the options for modifying the content in it, right? Where once an employee details are entered into a file, you can just update them, right? That's where we store the same thing in our general life. You carry a file, you carry all papers. If you have studied 10th class, the next certificates you store in the same file, right? You make as a collection. In the same way, files are generally, when you try to relate the same thing to a database, it is basically hard disk, right? Simple. Let me just make it simple by opening my IDLE and let's write some important content over there as a practice part. So I'll just save this file and I'll just rename it as UND files, understanding files, okay? Basically, files are very, very important to store huge amount of data. That's very important point. Files are highly useful to store huge amount of data. Because when we are understanding about IO operations, expectations could be source and destination. That is simple, right? What is your input and what is your output? That's it. So basically, I can make one thing. All program files are text files. That's a key point. All program files are text files because there are only two types of files, text files and binary files. And all images, music, videos, texts, and all these things. When I say all images, music, video, audio, those are binary files. All program files are text file. Images, video, audio, and you store text in the content, and you see .exe files, I mean executable files, everything. When you see .exe, you are getting the files in it, you see DLLs and everything because we have written .exe. Or executables are binary files. When I say binary, it is storing in the format of bits. Suppose character is stored as a 1 byte, 1 byte is 8 bits, and integer format is stored in 8 bytes, that is 64 bit. Simple. When you go for text file store the data in the format of characters. So that's where we relate all program files as text files and all images, videos, whatever we are saying, those are binary files. That is the reason whenever you install operating system, you just make it simple. Whenever you install operating system, when you click on new, you only get this MS Office, all the things when you have MS Office in your system. Otherwise, the default one is text document only, because even you can open the same text document in Unix based system or Linux based system or Mac or even Windows. That is where text file is very widely used, because that's where notepad, we take it as a notepad, even your notepad is your IDE. That's where people don't understand the difference of how do we relate the files. So we'll try to understand the main file IO operations, where the sequence of operations include, where generally whenever you create a text file or whenever you create a document, what do? You add some content into it, you remove some content into it, you remove the file. The same thing happens when you go for sequence of operations in file input and output. So where we understand how do we open a file. I'll write everything in quotations later because I don't want to run this. I'm just giving a notes for you. So open a file, where we need to understand whenever we try to go through this page, you just need to get the same thing. Read or write data to it. When I say data, that can be anything. As of now, we'll be going for the text data. Write data into it, and then we can close the file. That's where we have some mode of operations where we use the Python built-in function which is open, and we'll try to understand these mode of operations which are read mode, append mode, write mode, create mode, because based on these only we can try to make changes onto the files. That's where we'll understand how to read content into a text file, how to write content into it automatically, because with the help of a single line only we can automatically create a file. That's where when I say a file, that can be a text file or a Word file or an Excel file, because don't come across this Word, Excel, PPT. They are from MS Office software, because Microsoft given that as a package, but default your system is only having your notepad, that is text file. That's where we start our journey, and that is the reason for this entire course I have taken only IDLE, because you should understand how do you save your text file as Python file, that we have discussed in the beginning only. Just keep on concentrating and just understand the same things, because we'll try to understand the sequence of operations of how do we open a file, how do we read or write content data into it, and how do we close the file by working on write, read, append operations by using open built-in function in Python.